Recall Matt Ducey.
Speaker, it gives me a great pleasure tonight to rise and speak to Alfred Naro's Members' Bill. Mr Speaker, the Local Government Auckland Council Amendment Bill number 3. And I suppose as a new MP, I congratulate Mr Naro, who has had this bill selected and under his name. And I wish Alfred Naro all the best with that. Most people would know that Member of Parliament, Mr Speaker, someone who's committed to the communities he works in. People would know that Alfred Naro is committed to Auckland. And so it's great to see that he's bringing a bill that is relevant to the people of his communities. Could also mention I'm looking forward to this bill being sent to the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, a committee I'm on, and very ably led by the Chair, Scott Simpson, and the Deputy Chair, Todd Muller, very much becoming the top guns of the legislative process. Mr Speaker, I had a read around this bill, and although very short and simple, the purpose is around amending the local government bill to prevent candidates from serving on multiple local boards at the same time. And it makes sense, because if I can run you through a situation, Mr Speaker, imagine being at one local board and having, say, if we use Alfred Naro as an example, you've got Alfred Naro in one local board, and then you go to the other local board and there's Alfred Naro sitting there again, and then you go to the other local board and then there's Alfred Naro. I mean, really, it is going to be a bit confusing. So I can understand why this bill has been brought in, Mr Speaker. I don't have much experience of local boards in Auckland, Mr Speaker, but I do wonder when we move through the submission process if we are going to look at how we expand it out to community boards. And community boards are very big in my electorate of Waimakariri. We have the Kaiapoi and Rangiora Community Board, and of course in Canterbury. Because 1989 was a great year for democracy. The Europeans were bringing down the Berlin Wall, and New Zealand was setting up community boards, Mr Speaker. And there is a big movement to empower community boards greatly, because what they're saying is councils get more and more workload. They can devolve to community boards who can pick up some of that important grassroots work. And you could imagine that as the devolution to community boards happens, there's more work, increased workload, and it's quite right to understand how someone seriously could manage the workload of operating in both a local board or community board. So I'm looking forward to this bill going through the legislative process, Mr Speaker. And as I mentioned around the community boards, I just wanted to acknowledge the real role community boards play in local communities. So in my electorate, I think we quite often forget, we call it the Christchurch earthquakes, but in fact it was the Canterbury earthquakes. In my electorate, Kaiapoi was the most hard-hit area in the first earthquake in September 2010, having a very large red zone like in Christchurch. The community board, led by the very able Chair Robin Wallace, played a very leading role in the recovery and still does. And it was great that she was acknowledged with this work by cutting the ribbon of the newly opened Ruataniwha Kaiapoi Civic Centre, which consists of a new museum, an art space, a library, and the council's civic service centre. And very much that building represents the beacon of the recovery, and it's really setting a direction for their community forward. So I would like to acknowledge her and her 8 members on the community board. I visited them last Monday. They're doing a big piece of work around EQC and increased risks of flooding in those hard-hit earthquake areas. So overall, Mr Speaker, I would like to fully support this bill. I'm very much looking forward to it to go through the legislative process. And once again, I would like to thank Alfred Naro for bringing this very real issue to the House. I support it to the House. Thank you, Mr Speaker.